Thank you very much. You can be seated. If you're the type likes following an actual Bible, Ephesians chapter 2, we'll get there in just a second. As always, it's an honor and privilege to be here with you. I love this church. I love your pastor. I love the leadership here. They've all become my personal friends, and as always, it's an honor. Like always, our resource table is going to be available at the back. CDs, DVDs, USBs, and direct downloads. We're going to give all of it away. That's what we do. And so to the poor and the afflicted. The only thing I would ask is that if you know you're not going to get anything, God bless you. I'll see you next time. We're booked in to do Easter weekend next year with here, and this is going to be a blast. But if you know before I leave tonight, I'm going to get something. I'm going to ask that you do that first for this reason. My team of volunteers, they're just awesome. And Robin and Linda and Sonia, they've put aside their whole day today to help us with no payment. No, they just love helping. And you know, some of them have an hour drive home. And so I want to be kind to them. So let's be kind to them by buying first and chatting second. That would be awesome. And then, because we got to pack it up after we go tonight. All right, so I want to talk to you about the cross and resurrection again. I think that we could never exhaust that topic. The cross and resurrection is not something that has one meaning. It's something that defies meaning. For the God of the universe to humble himself, put on flesh, allow himself to be executed at the hands of a local government for the sake of all of humanity is not something that has one meaning. It's something that defies meaning. And so at Emerge Church, and for Shane Willard, we embrace anything that the scriptures say the meaning of the cross and resurrection is. We embrace that. So like in one place it's called the forgiveness of sins, and we say yes, amen. In one place it's called the cancellation of debt. Yep, absolutely. In one place it's called an in-your-face confrontation to principalities and powers. Oh, yep, we embrace that. In one place it's called the confrontation to oppression. In another place it's called freedom. And so we embrace all of these meanings. But for one meaning at one moment at one time, I can only pick one meaning. And it's not at the expense of the other meanings. It's one 40-minute message. I have to pick one and stick with it. But we embrace all of them because the cross and resurrection should not be that which we simply believe in. It should be more profound than that. The cross and resurrection should be the event that fundamentally shifts the way we see our entire world after that, right? And so I want to talk to you about that. And this is one meaning that Paul came up with that I just don't think gets enough playtime. I think we focus on the other things a lot, and I'm for it. Look, beautiful. But I want to spend the entire night talking about this one because I just don't think we talk about it enough. This is, next slide, this is Ephesians chapter 2. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. Now he's talking about between human beings now. This is not between us and God. This is between two human beings. By abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so by making peace, and might reconcile us both to God into one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. So one of the meanings of the cross and resurrection that Paul came up with was this, that the gospel in one nutshell is simply this. We were hostile to God, and while we were hostile to God, God acted first to make peace with us. Therefore, the reasonable response to those people who embrace that free gift is to end the hostility between two human beings. The idea is that if this follower of Christ here and this follower of Christ here, there's literally no reason for two followers of Jesus to ever be hostile towards one another. The reason is because no matter what we disagree on, if you back out far enough, both of us have our hands around the same cross, and that should unite us. It's one, what Paul called one new shared humanity. In another place, he says, never quarrel over a disputable matter. And then except for Jesus as the Christ, he was crucified, the resurrection is true. He calls everything else disputable. And he says, whatever faith you've come to in Jesus on disputable things, just keep it between yourself and God. Brilliant. What would the world look like if there was never ever an argument between two Christians on the internet for the unbelieving world to see and scoff at? There is nothing more uncompelling than two Christians arguing in a public forum with intent to harm somebody in the name of embracing a cross that the meaning of that is literally the exact opposite. Right? Now, Paul is alluding to something that Jesus did. First sermon, third sentence in. Pretty important. Check this out. Next slide. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Ooh, boy, that's strong language. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they're the ones that are called the sons of God. And unless you think it's a one-off sentence, 34 verses later in the same sermon, he says roughly the same thing with different words. You have heard it said, you should love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. Now this has massive theological implications to it that I'm not even gonna go there, because it's not my point tonight. Let's actually dig down and go to the most rudimentary, elemental, basic thing going on here. And let's say it this way, that if you're a follower of Jesus, which, boy, that was not very compelling. If you're a follower of Jesus, yeah, that's your cue, all right? Let's try that again. If you're a follower of Jesus, yeah, then our basic disposition in conflict is incredibly important to Jesus. That for followers of Jesus, we shouldn't just be affirming the cross and resurrection on a pamphlet, but actually the world should see the way we treat each other in conflict and go, right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm not sure, but those are children of God right there. That's a child of God. Now, I want to illustrate this with a story. I told this story at the women's conference I did earlier in the year with Nina, but I told the women I was going to tell it tonight, so don't worry, they're prepared. But I think this illustrates it very, very well. I got a phone call. I got invited to go study in Israel with a top history expert in Israel. And he's booked 2.5 years in advance, and he only does academic tours. He doesn't do tourist tours. And so, but he was listening to some of my stuff. The reason is because myself and his son-in-law were on the same stage at one point, and his son-in-law gave him a USB of my stuff, and he started listening to it, and he invited me to come speak to his synagogue, which was a messianic kibbutz right outside of Jerusalem. Now, the guy's a fully devoted follower of Jesus. He's a top history expert in Jerusalem, and he invited me to speak for him, and he was going to teach me history 14 hours a day for the rest of the week as payment. Amen. So, First day, within an hour and a half, he showed me something that literally blew my mind. I was amazed. Now, he speaks English, but it's not his first language. So let me show you, a room of English speakers, what I did. In amazement, I went, really? Really? Now, I was amazed. He took that as I disagree and wanted to argue. Okay, now, let me paint the picture here. We're in Jerusalem. He lives in Jerusalem, and he's the top history expert in Jerusalem. And he thought I was disagreeing with him about the history of Jerusalem. I wasn't, but he thought that. This was his, when I'm 95, I won't forget this. This was his response. Oh, Shane. Peace between us is the most important thing. If one of us needs to be wrong, please let it be me. Well, I was confused, which made it worse, because my response to that was, what? He said, oh, Shane. Listen to this carefully. Peace between us is the most important thing. If one of us needs to be wrong, please let it be me. If an outsider sees the way we treat each other in conflict, may Jesus be glorified. I would rather the world see us at peace than be right about anything. That's a son of God. I said, Ari, did you think I was arguing with you? And he said, weren't you? And I said, okay, first of all, I am so sorry. Please forgive my tone of voice to ever think I was arguing with you. That's one. Secondly, you're the history expert, bro. If I'm disagreeing with you about Jewish history, it's me, not you. That's second. And we're going to be 4 days of this. Let's just make a rule right now. I'm never disagreeing with you about Jewish history for 4 days. I said, I was amazed, man. He went, were you amazed? I said, Ari, honestly, I was amazed. He said, oh, good. Because I knew I was right about that, but man. He said, but Shane, seriously, I would rather the world see us at peace than be right about anything. If outsiders look at how we interact, may Jesus be glorified. I'm thinking, now that's a peacemaker right now. Now this leads to two questions. One, how does hostility work? Because if the cross is the end of hostility, then we need to understand how hostility works. And then two, how does peacemaking work? So let's talk about hostility for a second. There's a great story in the Old Testament that illustrates how hostility works. It's a long story, so I'm just going to tell the story. You're very familiar with it, and I'm going to show you a couple lines from it. It's the story from a guy named Samson. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, Samson is a guy that's out of control. He has no regard for his parents, no regard for respect, no regard for kosherness, no regard for the rules. He's just rebellious and going to do his own thing. And here's what happens. He ends up falling in love with a Philistine woman, which was an absolute no-no. He comes back and tells his parents, hey, I've fallen in love with a Philistine. They're like, no, please don't. She worships other gods. Please don't do that. He said, I don't care what you think. I'm going to love who I want to love. So the way the story goes is he sneaks out of his parents' house one night to go visit her behind their back, and evidently he runs into a lion on his way there. Now, if you're sneaking out of your parents' house at night to see your girlfriend, one great way to get caught is to run into a lion, okay? Now, evidently, he was skilled enough and armed enough to kill the lion. So he kills the lion, goes and sees her, comes back. Later, he's going back to do the same thing, and the lion's carcass is still there because the city hadn't picked up the trash yet, because the world's getting better, by the way. So the carcass is there. And evidently, some bees had taken nest in the middle of this dead carcass. And Samson does the most disgusting thing imaginable. And he reaches into the dead body, pulls out food, and eats it. This guy is out of control and disgusting. So he's hanging out with this Philistine family, and he thinks, you know what? I need to prove I'm smarter than them. So here's what he does. He says, hey, I bet I can tell you a riddle and none of you could guess it, even if I gave you 7 days and all of you could do it together. Bet you can't guess it, bet you couldn't guess it. They say, that's a deal. He said, here's what I'm doing. If you can guess the answer to this riddle, I'll owe you 30 pieces of clothes. But if you can't guess it, you owe me 30 pieces of clothes. And here was the riddle. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. I bet you can't guess it. Bet you can't guess it. Bet you can't guess it. Of course they can't guess it. He just made it up. No one else saw what he was talking about. So 7 days go by and they can't guess it, right? So here's what they do. They pull his fiance aside, their sister, and they say, listen, you're in our clan, and you need to do whatever it is women do to get men to talk. So she does whatever it is women do to get men to talk, and he goes, okay, listen. I'll tell you, but keep it between me and you. She goes, of course, right? She goes and tells them, right? At the last minute, they go, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Now, this is a direct quote from the Bible, word for word. I love this scripture. If you're the type of person that wants a life verse, this is a good one, right? Here's what Samson says. If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you'd have never guessed that, right? Woo-wee, strong language. This man is out of control. You're a bunch of heifer plowers. Now, if you're following the story, Samson owes them 30 pieces of clothes. Now, instead of running down to the TK Maxx, admitting that they got him and buying him 30 pieces of clothes and it being over, Samson goes and kills 30 of their relatives, strips them naked, and says, I owe you 30 clothes. Here's 30 of your relatives I just killed. Now we're even, right? This guy's out of control. Listen, if you lose a bet and your rational response is to kill 30 people, you are out of control. Listen, if you lose a bet and you kill 30 people today, you're going to jail forever. Back then, they wrote books about you, right? The world's getting better. Now, right? So this doesn't end there, right? Samson, this thing starts as a joke no one understands. And then it ends up with 30 people dying. But it doesn't end there. As a response to that, they burn her whole family to death, and then they offer him her sister. Then as a response to that, Samson goes, okay, I'll one-up you there. He ties foxes together and sets all their fields on fire. That's a year's economy gone. They then respond in another way. He then responds by killing 1,000 of them with the jawbone of a donkey. They then respond by arresting him, blinding him, and enslaving him. He then responds by pulling an entire building down on everybody. Now, in this story, what starts out as a joke no one understands escalates into everybody dying. That's called hostility. That's called escalation. Now, if you're here and you're married, you understand how this works, right? This is what happens, right? Have you ever in your marriage had an argument that started out over how to cut a tomato and then escalated into insulting the other person's mother, right? Right? It's like, well, my mom doesn't cut them that way. Well, I ain't your mama, am I? Well, I wish you were. Well, I'm not that fat. Right? So that's hostility. That's how it works. So what starts out here escalates into something bigger. Now, I want you to notice one key phrase from the scriptures, right? So that's the story. Let me show you one key phrase from the scripture that keeps coming up, and I think this is part of what the cross is about. Next slide. I was so sure that you thoroughly hated her that I gave her to your friend. So they take his wife away and give her to his best man. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? By the way, you didn't want to be a woman back then. Take her instead. Samson said to them, now this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I'll really do them harm. Premeditated, I'm going to harm somebody, and I have a right to do it. I'll be innocent. Now, it keeps going. Watch this. And Samson said to them, this time I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. I'm intending to harm you, and I'm going to be innocent when I do. According to the Australian Bureau of Criminal Statistics, 91% of all murders in Australia are morality-based. In other words, if somebody walk in Australia and just stab somebody, it's odd. It's absolutely, that's just out there. 91% of all murders in Australia, hey, why'd you kill that person? Well, if you knew what they did, you'd understand they deserve it. It's because of what they did, I have a right to harm them. Keeps going, next slide. Then the Philistines said, who's done this? And they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he's taken his wife and given her his companion. And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. Massive overreaction. Now, watch Samson's response. And Samson said to them, this is so critical to understand what we're talking about tonight. If this is what you do, I swear I'll be avenged on you. Then after that, I'll quit. In other words, I'll stop once I get one up. The problem is that if I don't stop till I'm one up and you don't stop till you're one up, eventually the whole thing escalates into hostility cycles. And that's part of why Jesus died. Jesus died to show the whole world this is what peacemaking looks like. You're being hostile, and instead of giving you what you deserve and one-upping you, I'm going to end the hostility cycle and make peace. That's what I'm going to do. Imagine marriages like this. Every marriage at some point has been on some crazy cycle of escalation. And at some point, one of the two has to go, hey, peace. Hey, I'm going to do something to stop the hostility cycle. Now, this is how the hostility cycle works. It works with 6 phases. Next slide. 1 is offense. So the first thing that happens is somebody gets offended by something. Secondly, then you dehumanize the adversary. This time I have a right to harm you. I disagree with you. You did something. You did whatever. And because of something you did, I have a right. Here's what hostility says. That you did something that gives me a right to hurt you. The cross says never. Never. People who embrace the cross and resurrection, not as a doctrine, but as a lifestyle, never. You never have a right to harm somebody, even if they did something to you. Never. Then there's an unwillingness to take responsibility for our part. At no point in the Samson story does Samson go, you know what, when you tricked me, I probably should have just went to the store and bought you 30 clothes. Killing 30 of your family members, bit of an overreaction. My bad. No, never. It's always because you did this, now I'm going to do this. Because that's called escalation. That's part number 4. And then next, then there's holding the other person responsible for the escalation. This is the whole 7-year-old. They started it. This is that. Adults do this. Why are you acting that way? Well, if you knew what he did. Oh, so he started it? Yes. Well, what? Are we 7? Right? Then there's a failure to learn, which leads to repeating the pattern. That's how the hostility cycle works. It's a horrendous conflict model. I'm not going to stop till I'm one up on you. That's the hostility cycle. Jesus died to create the possibility for a world that was much more profound than that. A world that says, yes, you hurt me, And I'm going to forgive you. And not only am I going to forgive you, I'm going to resist the urge to intentionally harm you because of the cross of Jesus Christ, I have no right to do that. I have no right to do that. So a couple of observations about this. Next slide. So the cross wasn't solely about forgiveness and freedom, but also an end to hostility. The cross was a physical manifestation of a new way to live. The most loving person always acts first to make peace. That's true in marriage. How could you imagine marriages that acted like this? Or neighbors, or businesses. This is enormously applicable. Let's say it this way, next slide. So peacemaking then is not a passive act. It's charging in with a different way to live and changing lives. Nobody makes peace naturally. Peacemaking is something you decide beforehand, I'm going to be that way. You realize when the history expert thought I was fighting him, that he chose how he was going to respond in that before that moment. Nobody naturally goes, especially not the smarter guy. Nobody goes, peace between us is the most important thing. Nobody does that unless they practice that over and over and over again in their prayer time. This is a lifestyle choice. Now, there's a couple ways to teach peacemaking. One would be a psychological way, and I can do that. But I want to teach you something from images from Jesus' life. Now, in Matthew 5, verse 42, he says, don't just love your friends, love your enemies, and pray for those who despitefully use you so that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. We've already read that. That's verse 42. It's the end of a 3-verse thought that Jesus gives. Jesus gives 3 ways to be a peacemaker in our life. And obviously, way number 1 starts with the idea, a conviction that says, because of the finished work of Jesus Christ, I never have a right to intentionally harm you, even if you're wrong, even if you disagree, even if, I never, ever intentionally can harm you because I don't just believe in the cross and resurrection. I want the cross and resurrection to fundamentally shift the way I see my whole world. Now, Jesus says this in Matthew 5, verse 42, love your enemies, pray for those who despitefully use you, so that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. And he gives 3 thoughts before that. Next slide. One is to turn the other cheek. So this is Matthew 5:39. Matthew 5:42 is the love your enemies, pray for those that you may be sons of. So it's a 3-point sermon. Here's what he says. And remember, in this part of the Bible, it's literally a sermon. He's preaching to Galilean peasants who were living under the oppressive regime of the Roman Empire. And here's what he says. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek. Which leads me to this question. How seriously do we take Jesus? How have we done with that? When someone offends us and slaps us on the right cheek, do we turn the other cheek or do we find a way to one-up and keep the hostility going? Jesus was very serious about this. Turn the other cheek. You say, Shane, what does that even mean? And does that even work? Okay. Quick history lesson. To understand this, we have to understand first century Roman class systems, okay? In first century Roman class systems, there was a 9-layered class system. So there was a 9-step, there's names for each one of them. For tonight, we'll call them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the highest class were people who lived in Rome. They were the aristocracy. They were class 1. Jesus is speaking to Galilean peasants. They were class 8. And then there was even a class below them because of some other different things, right? And here's the thing. Because of how they viewed class systems, there was a difference between right-handed slaps and left-handed slaps. If I'm a class 2 and you're a class 2 and we have a problem, I would hold you and I would hit you with my right hand because that's my clean, good hand. But if I'm a class 2 and you're a class 8, I would never hit you with my good hand. I would make a public statement by holding you and I would slap you with my left hand because it was my dirty hand. It's the hand I wipe my bum with. Essentially, it is, you're not even worth my good hand. I'm going to hit you with my poo-poo hand. It's that, okay? Now, true, all right? Right. Now watch Jesus' words. If someone slaps you, is he specific, isn't he? If someone slaps you on your right cheek, hang on. To slap someone on their right cheek, what hand would I use? My left hand. Essentially, Jesus says, if someone demeans you and declares that you're less of a human than them, don't fight back. You could die. Here's what you do. Turn the other cheek. A non-violent line in the sand that says, for us to continue on, you will address me as equals. I will not allow you to hit me in a way that we're not equals. You're going to hit me on my right cheek. I'm going to turn the other cheek. This was a nonviolent way to say, we're not having this conversation one more second with you speaking down to me. We're not doing that. This is not Jesus telling his followers, take whatever they give. This is Jesus saying, be nonviolent, but set proper nonviolent boundaries. People will address you as equals. All right? Just turn the other cheek. Turn the other cheek. Then this is the next step. Watch what he says. The very next verse. Watch this. Next slide. Oh yeah, no, sorry, next slide. Yep. He says, and if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. That's the very next verse. So the first one, he says, you want to be a peacemaker? Turn the other cheek. Second one, if someone sues you to take your outer cloak, give them your inner cloak as well. Now, to understand this, we got to understand Deuteronomy law, okay? First one, you got to understand first century Roman class systems. Second one we must understand is Deuteronomy law. In Deuteronomy, there was a provision made if someone sued you and you could not pay, you could give them your outer cloak as a pledge. Like, in other words, if you didn't have any money, but you really owed the money, you could give them your outer cloak as a pledge. Now, Jesus is speaking to Galilean peasants, okay? By some historical estimations, they were living under 87% taxation, okay? 50% of their fish, 30% of their grain, 12.5% to Caesar as the Son of God, Roman roads tax to move your goods and services, plus the dodginess of the tax collectors and the temple tax, okay? These people were losing their family land that had been in their family since the book of Joshua. And what was happening was 3% of the population were Roman sympathizers, and they were profiteering on Roman occupation, and they were still taking it out on the Galilean peasants by continually demanding more and more and more money, even though they knew they couldn't pay because of oppressive taxation. And the only option a Galilean peasant would have with a Roman sympathizer would be to offer his outer cloak as a pledge of payment later. Jesus says, if someone's willing to do that to you, just give them the inner cloak as well. Well, hang on a second. In the ancient world, there was only two pieces of clothes, the outer cloak and the inner cloak. Essentially, Jesus is saying, get naked. If someone's going to take your outer cloak, just give them everything. Just give them everything. Why? Next slide. And next slide. In Hebrew culture, being naked is not shameful. Seeing nakedness is. So the man being sued is placing the shame on the other while being peaceful. Because what kind of person would take both clothes? The principle is this. You confront greed with excessive generosity. That's how you confront greed. You don't confront greed with fighting. You confront greed with being excessively generous. It's sort of like this. If you're ever at dinner with a friend and the waiter comes by and says, how are we doing the bill? If both people simultaneously, if they say, one says, I'll take it, and the other one says, split it up. Well, what's happening is the generosity of the generous man is exposing the greed of the not so generous man. And what will end up happening is they'll both end up fighting over the same bill, even though the greedy man has already played all of his cards face up and we know he doesn't want to pay, right? It's that. Jesus said, this is what peacemaking looks like. When someone degrades you, turn the other cheek. Hey, if someone's being greedy with you, expose the greed with excessive generosity. It really works well. Then here's this third prong. This is the next verse. Watch this. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, just go 2. If anyone forces, that's a weird word, force. Who forces someone? What, is this like a personal trainer? What's going on here? Hey, what's happening? Now today, go the extra mile is a euphemism for giving extra effort, and amen. But in the first century, this was talking about something else. To understand the first one, you got to understand Roman caste systems. To understand the second one, we got to understand Deuteronomy law. To understand the third statement, we got to understand first century Roman military law. Galilee was an occupied territory with a Roman military. It was a horrendous place to live. All the women in Migdol were Roman property. It was not against the law for a Roman soldier to rape any woman in Migdol. This would have been an incredibly harsh place to live. And these Roman soldiers carried around these 70-pound packs. Well, think about it. It's 32 kilos. Think about it. If you're carrying a 32 kilo pack and you've got to walk, you've got a march you got to do, are you going to carry your own pack? No. You're going to find one of these underlings and they're going to carry your pack. It's sort of like a golf caddy. I'm not carrying my own bag. You're going to carry mine. And it was legal. But here was Roman military law. A Roman soldier who was class 2 could make a class 8 person, they could force you to carry their bag 1 mile at any moment. So they could say, you're going to carry my bag for 1 mile, right? But here was the law. You could force them to carry the pack 1, but you could not force them to go more than 1. If you force them to go more than 1, here's why. They wanted those people to be able to go back to work and pay taxes. They can't have them just walking around for free all day. It was a revenue problem, right? So here's the thing, right? Here's what the Roman military law was. A Roman soldier could make a Class 8 peasant carry their pack 1 mile. But if he made him go more than 1 mile, the military soldier would be docked a day's wage from a court-martial, right? So Jesus says, here's what you do. If they start making you carry their pack 1 mile, at the 1 mile mark, take off and go 2. You'll have a Roman soldier chasing you down trying to get you to stop. You can turn the tables. What you do is you get a little bit of a reputation for being a little cray-cray, and they will leave you alone. Yep. So Jesus says, here's what peacemaking looks like. Turn the other cheek. Go the extra mile. Give your tunic and your cloak. Oh, and don't just love your friends. Pray for your enemies so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. That's Jesus' peacemaking strategy. There's one other image from Jesus' life that I think really should be dominant in our consciousness when it comes to hostility and peacemaking. And that's this, next slide, is to heal the ear. So there's this incredible scene from Jesus' life that's so strange. It says that it was midnight. Jesus was in a garden praying. That's not a very threatening human being, right? It's midnight after Passover. He's in a garden praying. And it says there was a servant of the high priest named Malchus. And Malchus leads these Roman soldiers in. You know the scene. Judas kisses Jesus. Malchus says, that's him. The Roman soldiers get him. You know Malchus is important for 2 reasons. 1, he's named. 2, people are following him. But Caiaphas, the high priest, you don't go arrest the most popular rabbi in Israel yourself. What do? You send your intern to go do it, right? So that's what's happening here, right? And you guys know the story, right? It says that one of Jesus's companions took out a sword or a knife and chopped Malchus's ear off his head. Now, that is such a strange story, isn't it? Like, it leads to all kinds of questions like, was it legal to chop a man's ear off in the first century? A guy chops a guy's ear off in front of the cops and that guy doesn't get arrested? That's weird. That's at least assault and battery with intent to kill or maim or something. No. This guy chops this man's ear off, and the response of the Roman soldiers is essentially, these crazy Jews, I don't know what to do, right? It leads all kinds of questions. It also leads, like we all know, which disciple chopped the man's ear off? Who was it? Peter. We all know that, right? I mean, here's my question. How? How do we know that? Matthew says it was a certain companion of Jesus. Mark says it was one of Jesus' friends. Luke says it was one of Jesus' disciples. Why we assume Peter? Why give him such a bad rap? Matthew says a certain companion of Jesus. Mark says one of Jesus' friends. Luke says one of Jesus' disciples. The reason we know is because John said Peter did it. Right? Right? Matthew, Mark, and Luke are like, let's keep this on the down low, shall we? John's like, nope, let's just throw Peter square under the bus. Right? Right? So Peter chops this man's ear off. And no arrest is made. What a strange story. The question is why? Here's why. In the first century, there was a rift between the Pharisees and the rabbis and the priests. Here's why. In order to be a Pharisee or a rabbi, you had to go through 30 years of school. Actually, 24 years because you didn't start till you were 6, okay? But to even get into the school, you had to memorize Leviticus by age 6. It was a big thing. So 24 years of schooling it required to get the title rabbi, right? That's why in the whole Bible, there's only 3 people called rabbi. Jesus, Paul, Gamaliel. That's it. You never hear Rabbi Peter, never. Rabbi Jesus, Rabbi Paul, Rabbi Gamaliel, right? So it took a lot. Now, so in order to be a rabbi or a Pharisee, you had to go through a lot of school, right? You had to become a lawyer, basically. In order to be a priest, what did you have to do? You just had to be born. And so there was a rift between the people who had to earn their way and the people who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Does this make sense, right? And so the problem is that if you were a priest by birthright, it's possible for a priest, a righteous man, to give birth to a son who ends up being wicked, but because of lineage, he's the next priest. And you don't want a wicked man representing you before God. That would be terrible. So they had to come up with a way to disqualify priests. And here's what they did in the first century. They used an obscure law, an obscure passage from Leviticus 21 as a mechanism to disqualify priests they deemed as evil. This is Leviticus 21. I haven't changed one word. This is copied and pasted from the NIV. This was the rules around disqualifying priests. Next slide. You went one too far. Yeah, there you go. For no one who has a blemish shall draw near. A man born blind or lame, or one who has a mutilated face. Like, oh, how'd you live back then? Yes, sorry, sir, you are next in line to be the priest, but your face is just a bit too mutilated, right? It's just an odd thing. Or a limb too long, like, who measured that, right? Or a man who has an injured foot or an injured hand, or a hunchback, or a dwarf, or a man with a defect in his sight, or an itching disease, or scabs, or crushed testicles. You know I just can't read over that, right? Like, was that really a problem? Like, let's be honest. Like, Bill, you look like you've had a rough week. I've had a terrible week. What happened? Well, these 4 guys held me down, took 2 bricks, and crushed my testicles. You know what the worst part is? I can't be a priest anymore. Like, would you agree with me that if 4 guys hold you down and crush your testicles, whether or not you could be a priest or not, it's the least of your concern? You'd be like, where do I die now, right? Second observation is there a worse job ever on earth than the priestly inspector, right? Imagine that. Can you imagine that? Imagine that. Mutilated face. Nope, check. Yeah, you got limbs look about the right length. Check. No, he's seeing okay. Yep. Sir, there's just this one more examination that we have to do. It's going to be just as uncomfortable for me as you, but we must do this, right? It's just an odd way to live, right? Next. No man of the offspring of Aaron the priest who has a blemish shall come near to offer the Lord's offerings. Since he has a blemish, he shall not come near to offer the bread of his God. Now, here's what would happen. You could read about this in some first century history books, Brad Young's works, things like this. But here essentially is what they do. If they deemed a priest evil and they wanted to disqualify him, they would give him a blemish. And what they would normally do is they would mutilate their ears. And let me define that. They would hold them down, they would pierce their ear, and then pull, right? Now that would hurt, you would get over it. But it would leave you with an obvious blemish everybody can see, which would disqualify you from the priesthood. And let's just be honest, of all their options, a mutilated earlobe is better than, okay, so, right, they didn't go Alabama on him. Well, hold him down now, by God, right? Right. They would pierce the ear and then pull. Now, here's what happens. My Sunday school teacher told me that Peter was trying to kill him and missed. That makes no sense, because think about it, like, if you got a sword and you're intending to chop a man's head off and you hit him in the ear hole, that's called a direct hit. Likely what happened is Peter came up behind him with a knife or a sword and just flicked his ear off, right? Now here's the key to the thing. What has Peter just done? He's disqualified that man from ever being a priest ever again. That's his whole livelihood. What was Jesus' response to that? He reaches down and he puts the man's ear back on his head. Which does what? Well, 1, it heals him. 2, it takes him out of pain. But 3, it restores him back to the office of the priesthood. Here's my point, in case you've missed it. Jesus' basic response to the guy leading the charge to kill him was to restore him back to the office of the temple. It was to put his ear back on his head. Which leads me to this. Any thought in our heads that, because of something you did, Jesus is going to get you? What are you? That's not the message of Jesus. I don't care if there's a 25-foot cross over the top of the building. It's missing the entire point. Jesus' response to the guy leading the charge to kill him was not only to heal him, forgive him, and restore him back to the office of the temple. Which leads me to this question. Is there anybody you know who needs their ear put back on? Why is it that Christians, who are supposed to be the people who embrace the cross, actually are the ones always looking for reasons to take people's ears off. Don't do this because it's so uncompelling. But all you got to do is go Google Brian Houston or Russell Evans or Joel Osteen or Joyce Meyer. These are people who've forgotten more about what they've done for God than any of us will ever do. And there's a whole group of people going, how can we take their ear off because we disagree with one thing they said? Nay. Not compelling. It's not compelling. And it's not the cross and resurrection. The cross and resurrection was an end to hostility. In other words, the cross and resurrection exists so that a community could exist that puts people's ears back on their heads. And here's why that's so important. Every Sunday across Brisbane, people come to church. And at a church this size, there might be 20, 30, 40 of you that come in. And you don't know how to say this, but your ear is in your hand. Somebody took your ear off. Somebody said you're disqualified. Somebody said you did something so bad. It's like somebody somewhere took your ear off, took your ear off, and your ears are in your hand. And let me tell you something about Emerge Church. And this is what should be true of every church. Emerge Church is the place where you get mulligans, fresh starts, clean slates, second chances. It's a place where you don't bring your failure up. Emerge Church is a place where we're committed to get your ear back on your head. Because the message of Christianity is not just be forgiven, it's be restored. It's get your ear back on your head. It's an end to the hostility cycle. Now, great sermons are not meant to be agreed with or disagreed with. Great sermons are meant to be wrestled with. So let's wrestle with a few questions. Like, how seriously have we taken peacemaking? What's our basic disposition in conflict? Are we ear cutters or ear repairers? I mean, do we just believe in the cross and resurrection, or have we allowed the cross and resurrection to fundamentally shift the way we see our whole world? A couple questions. Next slide. Have we received the cross that forgives us while rejecting the cross that ends hostility? Where have we said, yes, Jesus, forgive me. Jesus, have mercy on me. Jesus, I embrace this. And I want everybody to make that decision. But where have we been guilty of embracing the cross that forgives us, but neglecting the cross that ends hostility and calls us to be peacemakers? Where have we said, God, have mercy on me. God, have mercy on me. God, have mercy on me. God, get them. God, get them. What? What? No. We should embrace both. Is there any place we're escalating violence right now? Look, maybe tonight in your marriage, one of you, you know you're on the crazy cycle. It's just, and it started out with nothing. And it's going to take one of you going, peace between us is the most important thing. If one of us needs to be wrong, let it be me. Without saying, but I know it's you. Okay? What do you got to lose? Seriously. If you just let it go 100% of the time, you'd only regret it about 2% of the time. What's more important? Peace. May the world, if your neighbor who doesn't yet believe in Jesus looked at how you treat each other in your marriage, they should see a dynamic, progressive revelation of what God is to the world. And what is God to the world? A guy that always acts first to make peace, even when you're being hostile. Where do we need to act first to be a peacemaker? I realize I've just started a competition. No, I'll go first. No, I'll go first. It's okay. It's good. Next slide. Whose ear do we need to repair? Is there any text or phone call or email or coffee? Hey, let's get the ear back on. Come on. Jesus is an ear repairer, never an ear cutter. May we stop looking for reasons to take people's ears off because of petty arguments or disagreements or we don't understand something. Are you kidding me? Leave Brian and Russell and Joel and Joyce, leave them all alone. And they're doing really good. And it's not compelling. May the world look at how we treat each other and go, right or wrong, I don't know, but they're children of God. I can tell you that. I'd love to be treated like they treat each other. Jesus has given his life for us. What's our offering back to him? Maybe the one question we should leave ourselves with tonight is this, to get the point. Next slide. What if the cross was God saying, how far do I have to go for you all to get along? Let me demonstrate what peacemaking looks like. You're being incredibly hostile towards me, and I'm going to humble myself and make peace with you. Can you imagine a world where Christians took that seriously and said, because God acted first to make peace with me, I'm going to be the one that always acts first to make peace with my brothers and sisters, even if they don't deserve it. May the thought never enter our mind ever again, because of something you did, I have a right to hurt you. It has no place in Christianity. It's not compelling. It's just not compelling. It's just not compelling. I bless you not to just be people who are saved and go to heaven when you die. I bless you to be people who are empowered to bring heaven here, and part of that is making peace. Let me pray for you. Lord, we love you. We honor you. We proclaim you're King. There's none like you. Why don't you just ask this question? Just be brave enough. Go, Lord, is there any place that I need to act first to make peace? Is there an ear I need to put back on? And while you're doing that, no one looking around or anything, just you got your own work to do. Is there anyone here tonight that would say, you know what, I've always felt I've been too hostile to God for God to accept me, but tonight I'd like to make a decision to receive all that moving that Jesus did. I'd like to embrace that. I'd like to trust that Jesus's version of my life story is so much better than one I've written on my own. I'd like to be a part of that. If that's you could just make a decision right there where you're seated. You could, if you need words, you could pray a prayer like this. Lord Jesus, I'm choosing tonight to trust your version of my life story instead of the one I've written on my own, and I'm going to surrender to that. I'd like to be a part of this plan. For the rest of us, followers of Jesus, may we take peacemaking seriously, for those are the sons of God. Would you look this way? Thank you so much for letting me be part of your world. I love you. I love this church. I really love your pastors. I love that this is a part of my itinerary once a year. I just keep coming by, and I won't stop. Until you tell me I'm boring, I won't stop, because I just love you, and I love what God's doing here. So I bless you, my brothers and sisters, to do all things without grumbling or disputing, and shine like stars. I bless you to be people who don't just embrace the cross that saves you, but also be serious and embrace the cross that calls us to humble ourselves and be peacemakers in our world. May the world look at us and go, now they're the sons of God. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of your world. Grace and peace, everybody. God bless.